Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of AZ Security. My name is Dinan Paardenkoper. I'm a security cloud architect at IT Impressive. And today I have a special guest, and that's Santhosh. Santhosh, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Dinant. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dinant, getting me into this session. I'm
Yeah.
Santhosh Kumar. I'm based in Melbourne, in Australia. I'm an Azure MEP in security and networking. It's a dual MEP this year. So this is my second year in MEP. I work as an Azure Cloud Architect, and I ran my own small startup. I just manage that with me at the moment.
Oh, congratulations for your second year on MVP. That's very awesome.
Thanks, thanks, mate.
Amazing to have you here. Complete other side of the globe. I'm here from the Netherlands, so that's amazing to have you here. And
Yeah, looking at other
also,
view.
yeah, awesome to have you on the show. Um, for today, we're going to talk about the security best practices on AKS, and I'm very curious what you're going to tell us.
Okay, just quick introduction. My name is so lengthy. You can call me Santhosh. I'm currently living in Melbourne. I'm basically from Chennai in India. I hold my MEP, as I mentioned, Azure Networking and Security. My specialty is more in infrastructure and security, mainly on hybrid and public clouds for last 18 years. I'm an Azure MEP, as said. Okay, whatever we spoke about, it's all today's session is about the agenda, which gives you the highlight. What I'm going to say about is securing containers. Why do we need to secure the containers? Securing the AKS clusters with the control plane. And the next section is about Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which provides a container security, which in detail gives you the runtime vulnerability scanning, image, and the node protection. And I'll run through a small demo and just quickly give an insight of what we spoke today, and I'll summarize from there.
Cool.
Without further ado, let's kickstart. Why do you want to secure the containers? Containers applications are most flexible and quickly scalable and allowing for rapid deployment. And these images are immutable, requiring new images, software updates, and it's ensuring consistency across your landscape. So you want to make sure it's been secured and the software updates are being updated as part of your daily or weekly routine. And the demand for the containers has been much higher now. The runtime environment includes the data, multiple configuration layers, and complication of your monitoring as well. And the need of the unique expertise needed actually for AKS. AKS, as you know, it's probably the cube and the containers has been it's been growing rapidly and highly across the IT landscape. There's a shortage of skilled professionals in container security, which can limit any organizations on capabilities, mainly which been using open source and container tools come up with steep learning curves for every IT individual who want to be keep updated with that.
I can totally agree about
Yeah,
that.
that's correct. The threat landscape for managed Kubernetes is, as you know, the Kubernetes is a bigger landscape. On top of that, the cloud and Azure provides a managed Kubernetes, which can be like the common attack techniques are exploit vulnerable images. The images are keep on getting updated. You want to be keep on top of it. Make sure your image or the containers which is running doesn't have any vulnerabilities, doesn't have any exposability of for your internet or any attackers. Exploitation to the application. You have to make sure your host which is running your containers has been secured. So these are the light small landscape and how do you want to secure it. That's why do we need to secure. This is what is AKS. AKS is Azure Kubernetes Service, which is a managed Kubernetes service for end customers that you can use to deploy and manage the containerized application. When you want to do a Kubernetes services, there are a lot of hard work required for making sure your Kubernetes clusters has been running. That hard part is being taken out in cloud. So Azure, the Microsoft manages for you the control plane. As a customer, you just go and have the minimal container orchestration expertise to use UKS. So we just need to make sure how many nodes are required for my cluster to run. We start with minimal. You can expand as much as required. Scalability, that's not an issue. The entire control plane is taken by Azure for you. So AKS is an ideal platform for deploying and managing containerized applications that require high availability, scalability, security, and portability for deploying applications. And you can do that in multiple regions across Azure cloud region available wherever it's been available. So that's in a nutshell. If you look at this diagram, the top section is where the managed control plane goes out from your responsibility, that is Microsoft managed. Anything you see below the thing, the Dockers and pods, that's only the customer's VMs which we need to manage as an end customer. So as I spoke about AKS, as I said, the AKS, the control plane is where it majorly hosted and managed by Azure. As an organization which requires a strict and security requirements with the cluster to host the sensitive workloads based on the data, the classifications, you have to secure that public endpoint because that control plane sits in the public endpoint. You have to secure that, and that's where you have two options: AKS private cluster and AKS API server VNet integration. So that when you do this, you don't need to have no more public ingress endpoints to lock down your control plane requests, stay inside your firewalls, and all this controls you do as part of your organization helps to keep that secure. Whether you run in a public or private cluster, the effect is the same. Your node pools and control plane live in a perfect harmony on a single secure VNet so that all the traffic between your pods, nodes, and the API server stays inside the Azure private backbone. There is no surprise, no public exposure. Just keep it everything secure. The first option is private AKS cluster. For this, you have to have your create your cluster, then provision that cluster as a private AKS cluster. When you do that, what happens is the network traffic between the API server and the node pool is secured, and it will have a FQD event created, and you'll have a private DNS, which will be have the configuration to make sure whenever I try to access my control plane, it just makes sure you're going on a private network traffic which is dedicated between your Azure and your virtual network where your AKS is stored. The control plane or API server is AKS manage Azure resource within a resource group, and the server and cluster node can communicate within a private endpoint that's exposed on the subnet of your AKS virtual network where the cluster sits. So it has just been within your virtual network. You don't need to go outside anything in the public endpoint. So that way, private AKS cluster is the best to use it. The second option is AKA's API server VNet integration. If someone who worked earlier with Azure application app services, right, they might be able to see that you can integrate your app services into VNet. It is similar to that. You can integrate your AKS into the API server into a VNet integration. What's the difference between the earlier one and this one? The private cluster requires your private endpoint and private DNS. Here, you don't need to have this private DNS requirement. This integration offers enhanced security and simplified network configurations. And this is a feature that projects AK's API server endpoint directly into a delegated subnet within the VNet. It's the same, but you just take out your private endpoint configuration, private DNS configuration. So that's the difference. And it has some both options has a little bit of work required for you to make sure it's been secured, and the API server being is supported for public and private clusters. You can add and remove public access after the cluster provisioning as well. So once you start it, you can just come back and say, I want to make sure my API server integration has been enabled. So that way it works. And what happens is the agent nodes always communicate directly with the private IP address of the API server. There is an internal load balancer sits on top of AKS that comes with a private IP address and without DNS. That's the difference between these two. So the first section is to make sure your control plane is secured within private.
Yes.
Second section is my favorite, a Defender for Cloud, a Defender for Containers, which gets you the container security. Has mostly been used as a Azure Security Center in olden days. Now it's been called Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is a cloud native solution to enhance, monitor, protect your container security for your container assets. It can be workloads, nodes, pods, images, container registry. And the best part in this is it supports Azure plus AWS and GCP as well, the other clouds. So you can do multi-cloud as well as your on-prem. If you have anything containers, Kubernetes cluster, you can bring that as an Azure Arc, and that helps you to secure. As a DevSecOps, the secure deployment, detect the vulnerability as early as possible, and the cloud security posture management will give you the visibility into your containers or the Kubernetes workloads across your landscape. This slide just gives you the Microsoft Defender for Cloud as a container software development lifecycle. It starts from coding, building, shipping, and deployment and runtime. So that Defender for Containers gives you the entire visibility across your supply chain. In a high level, different of our containers gives you the security posture management, which gives you the continuous monitoring and provides the risk assessment across all your resources. And the second thing is vulnerability assessment. That's a key which provides you the information about the softwares or the images or the runners on the containers or the workloads, provides you the vulnerability assessment. The third thing is runtime threat protection. So you have an image, you have a scanned it, you deployed it. What happens if gets outdated when the container is running? That is more critical. So that's when the runtime threat protection comes in and says whenever your container is running and make sure it's outdated, it just make sure it's been secured. And if there's any change between your initial image and there is someone has got changed your code or some kind of libraries, then you'll get a trigger. It's called binary drift. So that's kind of a runtime threat protection gives you the much majority. And deployment monitoring, making sure all the clusters are making sure it's been facilitated and it has a sensor deployment which provides all the required information for Defender for Endpoint API. Um, this section just gives you about what other additional capabilities like hardening, advanced threat protection. It supports on the multi-cloud as said earlier, and it can works in the hybrid as well, like on-prem as well as the multi-cloud. Okay. We spoke about different of a container, different of a cloud for container security. How does this works? The different of a cloud protects AKS cluster. It automatically collects the audit log data agentlessly through Azure infrastructure because it has everything within infrastructure and the Azure with no extra cost. Fully leverage different of a containers, and there are two different components mainly used. One is the different of a agent, which is a different of a sensor deployed as a daemon set within AKS node. It uses the technology to collect the signals from host and provide the runtime protection. The second one is Azure Policy. This is just an pod, an extension or add-on into the AKS, which extends your gatekeeper of open source, reaches as a webhook to enforce the policies that you want cluster to be consistent. Like you can imagine, like if there is an image which is vulnerable and you want to block it, then you can write a policy to make sure if I have my vulnerability image score of 6 or 7, and if it is beyond that, just block it. So even if you deploy it in production or dev, whatever it is, you want to make it consistent. So that way, the Azure policy, which helps you to keep your AKS cluster containers secure. How does it works? It can just works with agentless discovery of Kubernetes. What happens is when you just enable it on different of a cloud, you can enable it for a per cluster on a subscription level as well. And the best recommendation to do that is enable it across your management group or subscription so that it will be consistent across your platform for dev or non-prod, whatever the subscription you create, just keep it consistent. Different of a cloud creates a managed identity and it assigns a built-in role which requires to make sure it discover your AKS clusters within the subscription and gets all your data required for different of a clouds to keep it consistent and secure for you. So there is something called AKS Security Dashboard. It provides a visibility of security information on AKS. It provides the remediation required for AKS workloads, the container security, helps the platform engineers and admin and developers on securing the containers. This dashboard is accessed from cluster resource pane by selecting different of a cloud in the menu list. I'll show you in my demo list where you can just see this. This dashboard shows the security findings for the cluster, a summary. It shows total vulnerability, misconfigurations, compliances and non-standards. With all those information will be provided in a single dashboard of each of the AKS cluster. If you go in Microsoft different of a cloud, it is across all the cluster. If you want to dedicate it for each cluster, then you could just select that as well. The container vulnerabilities. This is a high level to make sure how the software development lifecycle you have to keep it. CI/CD, you can use a CI/CD tool to be image vulnerabilities been scanned, and next is container registry. Make sure the image has been scanned before it stores in the container registry. Once it's stored, you have to deploy it in the AKS. Once it's been deployed, you have to make sure the cluster, the node, and image has been not vulnerabilities, and you have to provide runtime protection. So you can get this data into back into CSPM as a different of a cloud, or as well as if you as a development team, they don't want to get into the security dashboard, they can just go to AKS security dashboard where they can just view only for their particular AKS cluster, the workloads where they manage. So that way the permission has been segregated from across the platform instead of just restricting what they are doing it and what they have access. Okay. The next slide speaks about the container image vulnerability scanning. How does it images has been pushed or imported into the Azure containers registry? How the scan works. Whenever a new image is been pushed or imported to the container registry, the image is scanned within probably few hours. This is few hours, but it just probably starts in 15-20 minutes. That's in reality. The defender of a container pulls the image from the registry and runs it in isolated sandbox within Microsoft Defender for Vulnerability Management for Azure environment. That scanner exacts all the list of softwares as part of image and then just goes and detects against all of these vulnerabilities available and make sure the Defender for Cloud filters the classified findings from the scanner. When image is healthy, it just say it's healthy, and the Defender for Cloud generates a security recommendation only if images has issues which needs to be resolved and fixed. That when it just creates an inventory and provides you the vulnerability recommendation for entire image. As I mentioned earlier, you can do image protection. Second thing is you can do the host protection. What happens is when you create AKS, the host, the control plane nodes are provided by managed Kubernetes, and it is a shared responsibility to make sure the managed services or the control plane is part of your cloud providers and the worker nodes are part of your customer. The vulnerable host introduced can be a risk. Make sure it's been fully covered. So AKS host or the nodes, it's a customer's responsibility for initially configuring the Kubernetes nodes required based on our requirement. Once a customer or we are being also responsible for upgrading the node pool to make sure if there is a version upgrade in a specific Linux or a Windows host which runs in, we have to make sure that image of the node has been getting updated. So it's been that's why it's called shared responsibility between the Kubernetes services in customer managed and the managed service of the Azure AKS. So what happens that way is when the Microsoft Defender provides vulnerability assessment and the malware detection for servers, this allows the customer to better secure and compliant. So in the node pools, it just gives you two different protections as vulnerability assessment plus the malware detection. What happens in vulnerability assessment? The Kubernetes node, which has been whatever the operating system, the software is scanned for vulnerabilities, recommendations are generated based on the softwares. The malware detection, the Kubernetes nodes are scanned for the malware. A security alert is generated for customer to review and remediate based on what is the findings. The Kubernetes node protections are provided by taking a snapshot of the nodes. As earlier in the image, what happens is it just take a snapshot of the image and just runs in a parallel isolation node. Similar to that, the VMs are taking a snapshot of the node pool disk for scanning, and it just runs a agentless scanning architecture to make sure it's been detected of vulnerabilities against the which has been present for the today. And it just provides you a report whenever there is something has to be fixed and it's been remediated. How does it works? This is how it works. On the customer account, you see the AKS nodes or virtual machine scale set, and then out of that, it just takes that VM's disk snapshot and just runs in isolated scanning environment and make sure the vulnerability assessment, the scanning platform, malware, everything has been detected. I mean, scanned across the disk and make sure it's been gets the insights and the metadata and just push that back into different of our cloud. That's how this agentless scans for the vulnerability nodes for the nodes of the vulnerability assessment works. The next topic is about binary drift detection. I think I just touched up earlier in this in the runtime protection. How does this works is the binary drift happens when a container is running with an executable that didn't come from the original image. If someone has got changed library or something they got installed, this can either be legitimate or it can be someone not intentional or it can indicate an attack. Since the container images should be mutable, any process launched from the binaries not included in the original should be evaluated as a suspicious activity to make sure we are securing the containers within the runtime. So this feature alerts you when there is a difference between the the base image and there is an updated libraries or configuration changes happening. It alerts you about the potential security threats, detecting unauthorized or external process within the containers. So that's way it just gives you an alert which has been integrated into different of a containers plan, and it is available for Azure, AKS and EKS in Amazon, and GKE for the Google Kubernetes as well. So this way, it just gets you the configuration drift happens within your containers or the landscape of your container security. Uh, this is for the malware scanning for the nodes. We have to make sure the Defender for Server P2 license has been covered and Defender for Containers has been enabled. Then it just runs a malware scanning against it's just Microsoft Defender for Endpoint scanning across your the protection of the customer nodes, which is the AKS worker node, and just gets the information. This slide gives you probably a better idea on what are the workloads across containers. For example, containers and image, you have to do image scanning, runtime scanning, threat analysis, and private registry connection, making sure it's just coming only from private. On the control plane Kubernetes, you have to keep private clusters. We spoke about that. And how do you want to, API server has been authorized. How do you want to restrict the access with all those intra authentication authorization? And coming back to Node, we touched about the dedicated host scanning, confidential containers. You have to just make sure these are the kind of a listed comprehensive security tool, which some we have touched in today's slides, today's session, but not everything has been touched. I'm just giving you an idea to have a envision what you want to do and how do you want to take that as well. Uh, I think this will be my last slide on the demo. Then probably I'll just jump into my Azure portal and just see how that whatever we spoke it works. On high level security, you have to make sure you build trust based images, scan the images, patch the vulnerabilities in the images before it goes for deployment, have a runtime scanning enabled, then you ship it into scan the images into the registry, make sure the registry has been secured and private cluster, a private registry, and make sure it has a RBAC enabled. When it goes to deployment, you have to use Azure Kubernetes administration controllers. There's nothing but Azure policies to make sure you're not bringing in any unpatched or vulnerability image into the running. So make sure it's been restricted, block the vulnerable images on the runtime, make sure it's been monitored, the containers are making sure it's been regularly scanned across the environment. Okay, I'll stop there.
Nice. You touched upon a lot of things in so short time. So amazing. Great explained. Thanks.
Thanks, Janet. I'll probably get my portal. So this is the Microsoft Defender for Cloud portal where it just gets you all the informations here. And what happens is, as I mentioned, the AKS security dashboard. If someone within the development team or application team or the platform team wants just access to a specific cluster of the workload, they just come to their AKS cluster and just click on Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Then they will just able to see all their vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, or any kind of recommendation comes out of this for a specific AKS cluster. This is the AKS security dashboard which I spoke. Um, this one just gives in the broader, the landscape, the entire IT landscape on Microsoft Defender for Cloud. What I have done is I have created a cluster and I had some images created for my Azure content registry and I have some pods and nodes are running on it. I just want to give you a quick run through on what it can be done. So the first thing is I just made a filter to keep within my resource group. I'm not which where we have for today. I'm not bringing in the others which I have number of resources. So I selected to my resource group which has AKS. You can see my Azure Container Registry has some vulnerabilities which says the images has to be fixed. So this is one of the options, and you can see each of the I have multiple images with the HTTPD with the different version, and everything is comes as vulnerability findings. If I go drill down here, and it just makes sure it should not have an API credentials with all my full access. It should be restricted with all those details of security configuration listed. And if I click on this specific vulnerability, right, it just gives me to update a specific library or software on that specific image has to be updated. You see here, it just gives you that specific information and it just gives you the risk level and you can just see what are the resources is coming. You have to, or if you say for example if you have an image which you just trust it's a false positive or something, making sure it's done all your due diligences, then you can do an exemption as well here. You can just go and create an exemption for a specific resource with a specific timeline. Then again, it will, once the timeline is done, it just pops up back. Okay, and I'll go back.
So basically, from the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you're seeing everything explained
Yes,
per component as the affected
exactly.
resource, what you're
Yes.
right.
The other tooling I would recommend someone to use is the Cloud Security Explorer. Not I'm not sure how many has been very aware of this. This is one of the greatest tool where you can just visualize and very specific and detect what they want to do with this. So what happens here is once you go here, let me try to get something. So what happens here is once you have gone here, you can able to select and filter a specific resource on AKSs. If you want to just to make sure you have see only the images what has been vulnerable or AKS cluster or the workloads and nodes. It just gives you detailed visual representation. You can just go and do a filtering. You don't need to write a KQL query. That's the best part here. It's just a filtering tag and drop it down, drop down. That will give you better understanding of your landscape. Uh, Yep. So if you look at here, you can see my misconfigurations across my cluster. I have my root files, API should be restricted. This is my first slide, which you remember the control plane has to be fixed for private. It should not be publicly bounded access. This is one of that. And in addition, you can create an Azure policies to make sure your Defender for Cloud or containers has been enabled across your resources.
Basically enforcing a lot of security best practices, right?
Best practices, exactly. That's correct. I think that's it I had. Didn't is there any questions you have you want to touch upon?
Of course, we are curious to see what you're trying to show on the other screen. Maybe you can click another button and then try to refresh on the
Yeah,
Defender.
this one, yeah, that's correct. Just it is as I mentioned, it's a query builder. It just you can see here you can select specific resources. Say for example, if I select containers, I can just say Kubernetes clusters, containers, container images. You can just do anything. And if I select everything here, and if I just search, it just gets me all my resources here straight away. I can just drill down in a little bit more, saying like, let me check my recommendations for just for my containers or the Kubernetes AKS clusters. This is how it is. It just gives me my resource type, what are the recommendations comes out daily directly for the resources. So you don't need to write any KQL query, it's just drag and drop. Much more if I need, I can probably say what is my vulnerabilities and get my all my vulnerabilities for my AKS cluster. Then you just do a search, then just gets with everything you see, CVID, what is my image, what is my vulnerable, it gets everything. So this is a
And
quick drag and drop.
which query, which query do you use the most?
I mostly use my vulnerabilities one and specifically on vulnerabilities and make sure my recommendations for the security has been sits. And the other thing I use is probably this vulnerability assessment status to making sure all my nodes, my workloads on the containers has been scanned. I don't want anything to be not assessed. Yeah,
Agree.
yeah. And I'll run this privileged container to make sure I'm not blaming developers. I'm just putting a thought. If someone has a privileged containers, then I'll just go and say, "May you have something which is not necessary." So just go and change it. So, yeah,
I love that feature.
exactly. I know. I know. Every security person will love that actually.
Definitely, definitely. Hey, you've showed a lot of features, a lot of great explanations. If I'm new to this topic, where do I start? Do you have some best practices there? If
Oh
I'm new
yes,
to this,
if I go to my Microsoft AKS one, there is a AKS container security baseline, um, which provides you the detailed information about what are things you have to do as part of Azure Security Baseline. for an architecture on AKS cluster. Uh, that gets you with a list of things you have to do in the security profiling network. It is against your compliance policy, and it is from Microsoft best practices as well. I can just bring it here. How do you want to segment? It starts from networking segmentation and just goes detailed down with identity, vulnerability, posture management, with the backup, everything. It just covers from end to end. This is the best article I would say to start with.
Well, thank you very much. Santosh, I want to thank you for your time, for your great demo, also for your explanation. I really love this. Looking forward to get my hands dirty, so to speak. But a lot of topics you touched upon are very familiar. We also implemented that on our side as well.
No worries, mate. Really
Um,
appreciate your time. It's having a nice speaking with you. Hopefully, I got some some decent information to have something to start off. That's good.
Definitely, definitely. For everybody at home, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please leave something in the comments below. And for now, I would say thank you very much and take care.
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone, for having watching it up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Till next time.